Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be digging into this story about a huge semiconductor cluster being built in South Korea by SK Hynix.
Okay.
You guys have sent over some pretty thought-provoking articles on this, and we're going to try to see if we can unearth what's really happening.
Yeah.
That this isn't just about microchips, though.
Right.
It's a story about, big promises and broken trust and a whole lot of money at stake.
Yeah. Big money.
So buckle up, because we're diving into a fascinating world. We'll start with this investigative piece from Mention the Name of the Korean news source.
Sounds good.
So before we get into the drama, can you give us a little background on what semiconductor clusters are?
Sure.
And why this particular project is such a big deal?
Yeah, absolutely. So think of a semiconductor cluster as a high-tech ecosystem where companies involved in every single stage of chip production are all located in close proximity.
Mm-hmm.
This basically streamlines the whole manufacturing process and fosters a lot of collaboration and stuff. And this is especially important for a company like SK Hynix. They're a global leader in the memory chip market.
Right.
And this new cluster in Yongin represents a staggering 120 trillion KRW investment.
Wow.
Which gives you an idea of just how much they're banking on this project.
120 trillion. That's
a lot of money.
That's a lot of Korean won.
Yeah.
That kind of investment usually comes with, a lot of fanfare.
Of course.
A lot of promises.
Yeah.
About economic benefits for the local community and stuff.
Exactly. Initially, SK Hynix made these grand pronouncements about, involving local businesses, boosting the local economy, creating jobs.
Right.
All that good stuff. But as we'll see, things haven't quite unfolded according to that script.
This is where it gets interesting, right? The articles you sent mention local businesses are actually struggling.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so that's kind of the heart of the issue here.
Okay.
While SK Hynix was painting this picture of shared prosperity, local businesses have been experiencing, declining revenue and a drop in customers. And a company called Huneed is at the center of this whole controversy.
Huneed? What is that? What's their role in all this?
So they operate the on-site cafeteria and convenience store at the Yongin Semiconductor Cluster.
Okay.
For the workers, of course.
Okay, so the construction workers.
Yeah, for the construction workers.
Okay.
Now, on the surface, providing meals for construction workers might seem, pretty standard.
Right, yeah, of course.
But the way they're doing it is really raising eyebrows.
So what's so unusual about their cafeteria service? Is it the food?
It's not so much the food itself. It's more their pricing strategy that's really unusual.
Okay.
Huneed is offering 3 meals a day for a mere 6,600 KRW.
Wow.
That's incredibly low, even by Korean standards.
Yeah, that's what?
$5 for 3 meals.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and they're also running a convenience store right on site.
Oh, wow.
Further undercutting, the local businesses.
So they're essentially creating a closed ecosystem.
Exactly.
Where workers don't need to leave the site for anything.
Pretty much.
So you could work, eat, sleep. The whole 9 yards.
Wow. And while this might seem like a, convenient perk for the workers, it's having a pretty devastating impact on the local restaurants and shops who are counting on that influx of business from this whole cluster project.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the article quotes some local merchants expressing their, anger, frustration. They feel betrayed by SK Hynix and the promises that were made.
Yeah, it's understandable that they feel betrayed.
Yeah.
It sounds like, SK Hynix made some promises that they just haven't kept.
It does sound like that. So who is this whom?
Right.
And why are they offering such incredibly low prices? Are they just a benevolent company trying to, keep costs down for the workers?
Well, that's where things get a bit more complicated.
Okay.
Huneed's connection to SK Group,
Uh-huh.
the larger conglomerate that SK Hynix is part of,
is much deeper than it initially appears.
Now we're getting to the juicy part.
Yeah.
I knew there had to be more to this story. Tell me about these connections.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit.
Go ahead.
Huneed's history is intertwined with SK Group through some, pretty prominent figures.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about Chae Young-jin, who is a relative of SK Group chairman Chae Tae-won,
Okay.
and Yoon Sik-min of Taeyoung Group, both of whom were involved with Hun.
So we have family ties and powerful business connections.
Yeah.
Does this suggest that the bidding process for the cafeteria contract might not have been entirely fair?
That's the million-dollar question, right? The Korean Fair Trade Commission, the FTC, actually launched an investigation into Huneed's practices back in 2019. They were under scrutiny for potentially receiving preferential treatment from SK Group affiliates. This raises serious concerns about, whether a level playing field even existed for other potential bidders.
Right, so that's a red flag. So what happened after the FTC investigation? Did they find any wrongdoing?
Well, following the investigation, Chae Young-jon and Yoon Suk-min sold off their shares in Huneed, seemingly to distance the company from SK Group, but... And here's where the plot thickens. The ties didn't end there.
This is like a corporate thriller.
Yeah.
Tell me more, what happened next?
Huneed's current CEO, Sun Byung-jae, has his own interesting history with SK Group. He previously worked for SK Construction, which has since been rebranded as SK Ecoplant. And guess what?
What?
SK Ecoplant happens to be a major player in the construction of the Yongin semiconductor cluster.
So even though they tried to create some distance, the connections between Huneed and SK Group remain.
Yeah, it seems that way.
And this Sun Byung-jae guy seems to be right in the middle of it all.
He does, doesn't he?
What's his story? So it's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion and finding more connections with each layer.
Right.
What else can you tell us about Sun Byung-jae's ties to SK Ecoplant?
Well, his own company, Chemis Engineering and Construction, acquired a significant chunk of SK Ecoplant shares back in 2020. They later sold those shares for a tidy profit, which, raises questions about the nature of these financial transactions.
So we're not just talking about historical ties, there's like a recent financial link as well.
Exactly.
And this all ties back to SK Ecoplant, the very company responsible for building this semiconductor cluster.
Yeah, that's right.
And it gets even more interesting. Chemis Engineering and Construction also secured a 76 billion KRW contract from SK Ecoplant for construction work at the Yongin cluster.
Yeah, it's starting to look like a very cozy arrangement.
So let me see if I've got this straight. We have this company, Huneed, run by a former SK employee, undercutting local businesses with these unbelievably low prices. And Huneed has all these tangled financial ties with SK Ecoplant, the company in charge of building the cluster.
Right.
It all seems a bit too convenient, doesn't it?
Yeah. It does raise serious questions about potential favoritism and whether the interests of the local community are even being considered, Yeah,
the article you sent paints a pretty stark picture of how these events are impacting local businesses.
Right.
Let's talk more about that impact.
Sure.
The initial promise was that this project would be a huge boon to the local economy.
Yeah.
What's the reality for businesses in the area?
Well, the reality is far from the rosy picture that was painted. Many local restaurants and shops are actually struggling to stay afloat.
Wow.
They're seeing way fewer customers, and their revenues have really taken a hit. The article quotes one restaurant owner who said, "We were led to believe that this project would bring prosperity to our community, but instead it feels like we're being squeezed out."
Yeah.
And it's sentiment echoed by many others who feel let down by SK Hynix.
It's heartbreaking to hear that, businesses are struggling because of this situation.
Yeah.
It really goes against the spirit of what was initially promised.
It does.
So with all these questions swirling around, how has SK Hynix responded to these allegations?
Their official statement denies any involvement in the cafeteria operation. They're essentially just passing the buck, claiming that it's SK Ecoplant's responsibility.
So they're washing their hands of the whole situation.
Basically, yeah.
What about SK Ecoplant and Huneed? Have they issued any statements?
Not a word. They've remained completely silent, which, let's be honest, just adds to the suspicions surrounding this whole affair.
It definitely doesn't look good when those involved choose to stay silent.
Right.
It seems like the community has been left to deal with the consequences while the companies involved are trying to avoid any accountability.
Yeah, it seems that way.
But it sounds like the residents aren't taking this lying down.
Absolutely not. The article mentions that residents are planning protests.
Oh, wow.
To demand that SK Hynix honor its commitments to the community.
Good for them.
They want a fair deal, and they're not going to be silenced.
It's inspiring to see the community standing up for their rights and demanding accountability.
Yeah.
This isn't just about a cafeteria contract.
Right.
It's about corporate responsibility and the impact these massive projects have on local communities.
Yeah, it really highlights the importance of transparency and ethical conduct, especially when you have these massive corporations operating in smaller communities.
Right.
The power dynamics can be so skewed.
Yeah.
And it's crucial that these companies are held accountable for their actions.
This story raises so many important questions about corporate influence, economic fairness, and the true cost of progress.
It does.
So what happens next? Will SK Hynix be held accountable? Will local businesses be able to recover from this?
Well, that's the big question. We'll have to wait and see how this all unfolds. Will the protests bring about change? Will SK Hynix reconsider its approach? You know, this story is far from over, and its outcome could have significant implications for future projects like this.
It sounds like this situation could set a precedent for how these large-scale projects are handled in the future.
Yeah, and it really underscores the importance of communities being aware of the potential downsides of these projects.
Right.
And demanding transparency right from the outset.
So what does all this mean for our listener who brought us this story?
Well, it's a good reminder that even in a world of rapid technological advancement, we can't lose sight of the human impact.
Yeah.
The pursuit of progress shouldn't come at the expense of local communities and small businesses.
It's a stark reminder that economic progress doesn't always trickle down in the way it's promised.
Yeah.
Sometimes the very people who are supposed to benefit end up bearing the brunt of the costs.
It's true.
So if our listener finds themselves in a similar situation where, a big corporation is making all these promises about economic benefits,
Right.
what advice would you give them?
I would say don't just take their word for it.
Yeah.
Look beyond the glossy presentations and the PR campaigns. Ask tough questions.
Right.
Demand transparency.
Okay.
Look at the company's track record in other communities. Talk to people who have been impacted by their projects in the past.
So it's about being an informed citizen and advocating for your community's interests.
Exactly.
And remember, collective action can be powerful.
Oh, absolutely.
This story shows that residents can make their voices heard
Yeah.
and demand accountability from even the largest corporations.
Yeah, they can definitely make a difference.
This entire situation with SK Hynix Huneed and the Young and Semiconductor cluster feels like a cautionary tale.
It's a reminder that we can't blindly accept promises of economic growth without really considering the potential consequences.
Right.
We need to be vigilant.
Yeah.
And ensure that progress benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Well, I think we've unearthed a lot of important insights from this deep dive.
I think so too.
What are your final thoughts for our listener as they continue to follow this unfolding story?
I would say pay attention to how this situation plays out.
Okay.
Will SK Hynix actually address the concerns of the community? Will there be any consequences for the potential favoritism and the lack of transparency?
Yeah.
This case could set an important precedent for how corporations engage with communities in the future.
It's a story that underscores the importance of holding power to account.
Absolutely.
And demanding a more equitable approach to economic development.
I agree.
Well, thank you for helping us unpack this really complex issue.
It's been my pleasure.
Always happy to delve into these intricate stories with you.
Likewise.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the dynamics at play in this whole semiconductor saga.
Yeah, I hope so.
Keep asking those tough questions, stay engaged, and remember, your voice matters.
It does.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.